proves how it actually functions. Mark V is a male tank, so she has got a pair of 6-pounder guns and sponsons on either side. They couldn't put a turret on the top because that's where the engine is, right in the middle. Secondary machine guns, tracks wrap all the way round, and she can cross a trench up to 3 metres wide. On weight, they carry about 30 kilograms each. Now everybody says, oh, you know, how can they function with that? Well, modern British soldiers, you're in places like Afghan, you're carrying about 50 kilos. So it's one of those things the soldiers don't always need to carry along. They are coming under fire. They've been probing forward, and we've got 2 German positions, 2 sandbagged places. Now the infantry at this point need to take first time tanks used September 15, 1916 on Salt. They were German soldiers actually ran away in terror from this monster. Tanks advancing. She's going to put a few 6-pounder rounds, common shell into those emplacements. Quiet them down a bit. We are coming forward. Now, most of these arms we have got over on this side, we've got all the newest stuff. The light machine gun firing, infantry are pushing forward. Tank firing, tanks doing those positions. And we have another vehicle. Now, this is a wonderful tank over on my left-hand side. This is an original First World War tank. This is a French Renault FT. Cornishmen have taken the enemy, first enemy positions. They're going to move on. I suspect there is more waiting because the German infantry, the Lancers, have withdrawn and they're back in the second line of defence. So we need to put them out of there. That's going to move forward again. Renault is moving forward to flank. Mark IV is moving forward. Both of these are very slow. But that doesn't matter because they support, they move at the same pace as the infantry. More rounds going down. When they shove them off the battlefield, they're starting to move already. They are retreating. I think it's very wise. Infantry against 2 tanks is not DCLI once again going forward using the tank. Horrific conditions in there. When you've got the engine running, the exhaust is blowing just about red after about 20 minutes. The temperature is about 50 degrees centigrade and the air is full of carbon monoxide and cordite smoke. And probably a whiff of poison gas as well, if that's what you're thinking about. Being a tanky in those conditions was a tough job. They're also quite vulnerable. The armour is just over a centimetre thick. Keep out machine gun or rifle fire, but if an artillery round comes along, then that's it. It'll smash the tank into burning metal. Now we've got another vehicle entering the arena. The British Army in particular is the most mechanised of the lot. We are using an awful lot of motor transport, whether it's tenders or trucks or ambulances. And this Liberty truck is American made, and it's the first truck that is actually designed by the US Quartermaster and approved for US Army service. Up to this point, they've got a whole mass of different vehicles. The Liberty truck is accepted for general service. It's manufactured in a number of factories, and in about the space of 18 months, they produce 12 to 14,000 of these things. American industrial might is coming into play, just as it did in World War II. Liberty truck has picked up victorious infantry, saving them from a walk off the battlefield. Right, that is the end of the
too far. That's our Matilda 1, the first British infantry tank.
Which made it really rather undergunned. The M5 was an improvement, bigger hull, swapped the engine out from a radial engine to a couple of engines, and the radial engine moved on to use aircraft production. Now to deal with relatively modest protection, so the crews like the firepower, they like the speed, they weren't too happy about the lack of protection on there. Situ, and you there she goes. Not going to interrupt the burning engine on the Spitfire. And she's coming round again. Hopefully not on a scraping one. Here she comes. is a lovely noise. Lovely noise. Looks like we're getting another pass as well. You're away, everybody. See you. Okay, so the Girl Creek boys have stolen the show again. And for those of you with perfect pitch, it's the same engine that was in the M3. In 1942, when the Sherman saw combat in El Alamein with the British in North Africa, it was as good as any German tank on the field, designed as a 30-ton vehicle for easy shipment. That limited the amount of well, the answer is some of the early ones suffered from problems through poor ammunition stowage. By the time we get to the A2s, A3s, they get that handy better. Successful Allied tank warfare. German soldiers went to war on their own 2 feet, and they were supplied by food and ammunition by horse-drawn wagons. The Americans were producing 50,000 Germans. The Germans produced 6,000 Panthers, a shade over 1,300 Tiger ones. This one is dressed as it would have been in combat. We often get asked about the wooden batons on the side. They're actually there. People will say, Mr. King, I haven't quite, no, it didn't work like that. They're there to defeat the sort of hollow-charged anti-tank rank like Panzerschrank. So, there we go. We're coming on an intelligent vehicle. I'll pass you over to David.
So we're going to share this. So the next one coming on starts the war, or rather in 1939 it's starting to be built with a much smaller gun, the 76mm gun. Still powerful, still much bigger than what was on the German tanks at the time. In the middle of the war, after the battle occurs, the Russians decide, shall we build a brand new tank, the T-44? Now the T-34 is designed by mainly by a chap called Morozov, and the different factories in Russia, even though they are part of this Soviet system, there's still rivalries between them all, and a guy called Koshkin manages to get Stalin's ear that says, listen, looking after someone from Piranha, you're going to need a bigger gun, or there's a thing that's going there. Stalin leans forward and says, yes, I like the idea. Piranha's not so sure, they just ordered the KV-1 heavy tank, same size gun, so they go for that instead. And the T-34 goes into production just at a time when actually Soviet Union is pals with Hitler. Stalin and Hitler have done their pact. That goes right the way through to the summer of 1941, when finally Hitler invades the Soviet Union, and all of a sudden hell breaks loose. The Soviet Union loses enormous numbers of the tanks. Move the factories famous out the way of the invading German military. They start, they're getting tanks from Britain, later on Lend-Lease as well, anything to keep them going, and they start moving these tanks to really be careful with them to win with, so a really important bit of kit there. Now, this T-34, one of the reactions it's to is of course some of that bigger German stuff being used in places like the Panther, the Tiger, and now we've got some heavy German armour I'm going to hand over to Chris.
Thank you, David. Well, without sounding facile, you've seen some wonderful, wonderful tanks already today, but for a lot of you I suspect this is the moment you have been waiting for. I don't think our secret that we've been keeping for the last few weeks is safe. So we have today not one Tiger, but two for you. We have got Tiger 131, our own, and we also have the King Tiger, the Königs Tiger, Tiger 2 from our friends at Sherman, the Musée de Brittany, the French Army Museum. Looking at King Tiger to start with, the Königs Tiger, that is a beast of a machine. That weighs 68 tons. The armour on the front is 150 millimetres thick. It's also sloped back at 50 degrees. Now the whole thing with that, since they got the Tiger 1, they've learned from investments. Tiger 2, they have copied the T-34 that you've already seen. T-34 and also use much the same design of the Patton, so the armour is sloped. That front plate is sloped back at 50 degrees. That means two things. Firstly, it increases the line of sight thickness, so putting a round through that is just about impossible. It also massively increases the possibility of a ricochet. So Königs Tiger is massively well armoured. If you want some proof of this, go and have a look at our King Tiger in the museum. Have a look around the side and you'll see the impact of two 75mm armour-piercing rounds. They have ricocheted off, they've done hardly anything. And that is the sponsor arm, that's the side arm. So if you're in an allied tank, knocking out King Tiger is going to be just about impossible. It's 88mm, so it's the same calibre as that of Tiger 1, but it is a longer barrel and much bigger cartridge, much more amount of propellant behind it. If I put that in simple terms, if it really tries, that can put a round through the frontal armour of Sherman or T-34 or a range of that is a massive, heavy gun. Group of fighting these people serviceability of a King Tiger, probably around about 59%. With something like the Sherman, with a much better logistic chain, lots of training and maintenance, it's more like 80%. So a tank that's out of action an awful lot of the time is really not going to do you a lot of good. Now the predecessor to the King Tiger is of course Tiger 1. Now, look over there. This is a wonderful moment. This is the first time, probably since the end of World War II, that King Tiger, Tiger 1, we've got our lovely little Panzer 3 there, it's the first time these two Tigers have actually run together. So that is one. Now we already talked about the King Tiger, but Tiger 1 wasn't too shabby either. but they put it all together, and they've got Tiger 1. That enters the fray in 1942 on the Eastern Front and later in North Africa. Now, Tiger 1 is superb in itself. It's got 100mm arm on the front, and although the Tiger 1 88 isn't as powerful as the Tiger 2 one, you can still put around through that Sherman or that T-34 a range of about 1,500 metres. And they're running great numbers. They now produce around just over 1,500 Tiger 1s. So this is time that causes the consternation of weapons. This is the thing that inspired Tiger phobia in Allied tank groups. Now, you've already got Tiger 1. It's a very, very good heavy tank. Disruption that would cause erupting grid. Why? You've already got Tiger 1. You then build. I think the simple answer is that Tiger 1 They may not be quite good, they may not be quite well armoured, they may not have the punching power of either the Tigers, but when you can send 5 or 10 Shermans or T-34s at the conclusion is going to be obvious. That, in a sense, when you're looking at the display we've got here today, that is effectively summing up World War II. You have German high-tech, total lack of mass production, but very, very good quality. But then
I like the way they're training the turret.
what we're going to do now is the remaining tanks, the US tanks and the T-34. I'm going to give you another chance to have a look. You just see the Tigers go around. Just make a mental comparison with these fast light tanks. None of these are quite going full speed, but these are a lot. Faster, more reliable, and their reliability because the weight is really nice. T-34 just behind me. The tube top with
from the 29th Infantry Division. 29th landed at Omaha. So these are guys who've got plenty of combat experience. Although to be honest, the 5th are likely to be replacements given the casualties that the 29th had suffered. They're backed up by some light armour. An American M5 tank. Thomas's unit has teamed up with this American convoy probing eastwards. My goodness, there's a tank there. Right, the anti-tank gun has spotted them. And now the Americans are deploying to deal with that anti-tank gun. As you can see, American infantry have debussed from the Deuce to half of GMC towards the German emplacement, and the Germans were outnumbered. The small forward emplacement, about 100 units. Their job is not necessarily to defeat the Allied convoy, but to hold them long enough for reinforcements to come in and fight them. Now, with only a tank gun, they are at a disadvantage. Here, the light tank mobile, as you can see there, they're taking fire there on the position to force really the German troops out of that. There is a lot of fire going down. If you notice, when you see a bit more closely, you'll notice that the American troops are tending to use automatic weapons, semi-automatic rifles. The Germans are largely using bolt-action rifles. They don't have access to that kind of ammunition support that the Allies have got. Having said that, Hitler is very aware that the Allies are still bringing in their supplies to the beaches of Normandy and that's the Antwerp. So that's right, now then. The Americans mark the position, they're storming it, and the Germans, and one bit later, the Germans are withdrawing. Members of the Hitler Youth have been inducted straight into things like the Waffen-SS. Others may be clinging to this idea that Hitler has, if they can make the Allies pay in enough blood for every metre of the fatherland they seize, with what's left of the Wehrmacht to drive the Soviet troops out of eastern Germany. Some may simply be afraid not to fight because they've seen the bodies hanging from telegraph poles with the notices around their necks, this coward refused to fight for the fatherland. There were SS, death squads, discipline squads, like roving behind the lines. Now, these young Germans here have done their job. They've held the Americans long enough for reinforcements to turn up. So we can see here, it's again a big group of reinforcements. This is not the Panzer Division, this is the sort of firepower of the Kampfgruppe. In front, we have an Sd.Kfz 222, light armoured car, in great service in the Western Desert. The Royal Armour is going to be the cannon, it's getting a bit elderly looking by the stage. There we are, they're pleased to see the big bow in the middle. To the rear, we have a Hanomag half-track 251 personnel carrier, but in the middle, of course, they've got their trump card, this Kampfgruppe. They've got a King Tiger, a Tiger II. And yeah, you can see that's a fairly intimidating bit of kit. Now, the Tiger II was issued to elite forces only, so the chances are then that the young men manning that Tiger II are again probably Waffen-SS, because all of the Waffen-SS Panzer units split up from their fellows acting as the fire support for this particular Kampfgruppe. In the rear, the half-track, well, I'm now pretty sure that these German troops are, the foot soldiers are Panzer Grenadiers, because only the Panzer Grenadiers had access to this kind of armoured support, this kind of armoured transport. The average Wehrmacht soldier would go to war on his own 2 feet. and be supplied for horse-drawn wagons. In the handbag is mounting a couple of heavy machine guns. An MG-34 and MG-42. Each one of those capable of laying down somewhere in the region of 1,200 pounds a minute. Quite capable of dominating the battlefield. The problem is, you're firing 1,200 rounds a minute, you're going to get through your ammunition very quickly. And it's not guaranteed that you'll get this full resupply. Now, the King Tiger is taking up a tactical position here to cover the potential approach of the Amis, the Americans. This is a real threat. That Tiger is capable of taking out anything that the Allies have. It's very, very powerful. It's also very, very heavily armed. It's going to take something to penetrate that heavy armor. Advantage the Allies had is almost complete air superiority. The Luftwaffe has been great. In fact, the Germans had not a dark little joke where you said each other. If you look into the sky, you see an aeroplane, and it's brown, it's British. If you look into the sky, you see an aeroplane, it's silver, it's American. If you look into the sky, you see an aeroplane, and there, it's German. That's the kind of car they knew full well. That Tiger crew know full well that that's the biggest threat on the so-called hypersonic, unionic Neumos, things like British typhoons, American thunderbolts. The British typhoon pilot wrote in his memoirs that underneath his wings he had the firepower of a broadside from a light cruiser. That will deal with one of these. You're getting a good view of both the camouflage on the lighter armoured vehicles, the use of natural camouflage to break up the outline and primarily to protect them from air attack, but also the zimmerit of the King Tiger. That rippled effect you'll see on the armour is a paste applied to the outside with a view to preventing the use of magnetic mines. The Germans were convinced that the Allies would be rushing up to the tank, slapping a magnetic mine on the side, and then taking it out that way. Now, we did actually have magnetic mines, a so-called limpet mine, which would have done the job, but it was never done, it was never attempted. The Russians tried it once and it failed, but throughout the war, the Germans persisted in slapping the zimmerit on their vehicles. An MP40 submachine pistol, we've got, I can see, there's a Russian, I might see, no, some of them might be armed with Russian weapons. The Americans had a Maxim. Not a Maxim gun, had a Maxim. Find them, fix them, flank them, finish them. Find them, well they've done that, or rather they've blundered into them. Fix them, that's what they're trying to do now. There they are, the Germans are withdrawing to a village nearby. They've got a heavy mortar position. That's it, keep that fire going guys, keep their heads down. Flanking the village. 251 taking a hit. At the moment, the timing is not good for this sort of thing we would have expected. The cavalry has just arrived. 2 Sherman tanks, an N4A1 and N4A2, N4A276. The slightly older design, the N4A1 is not going to be able to cope with the big Tiger outside. The 75mm on that Sherman is not capable of penetrating virtually any of the armour of the big Tiger. But, the is capable. So now the dynamic is shifting a little bit. The water's still putting out. We've got smoke bounce put down. This is to mark the position of the American infantry. If there are any Allied aircraft in the air, we don't want them bombing the American position, so they're marking their front line with coloured smoke. Germans surrendered. Now remember, some of these German troops, some of these Panzer Grenadiers might be 16 or 17 years old. They might never have been in combat before. They've just gone through a terrifying, gut-wrenching experience. Some of them have been told they'll be shot when the Americans will surrender. Others have decided that surrender is the only obvious thing to do. There goes a Jeep with a 30 caliber mounted. Try and put yourself in the mind of one of these young Americans from Wisconsin, Arkansas. These Americans, particularly if they recognise the flashes, they know that they would have landed in Omaha, they'd have struggled across Omaha. Firing on the King Tiger. It's been bracketed. Well, the German vehicles are going to leave the field. Pretty obviously.
again, thinking about it yet again today, of course, in the modern era. I thought this morning I was finishing off about those British tanks at the end of the war, and this time now in the century, that the tank that we hoped would be ready in 1945 to do this. As I mentioned, this is the end of the war by only a few weeks. Operation Sentry, we sent the very first prototypes out to Germany to test them to see if they're going to be any good. And it turns out we picked a winner. Now you would have seen, we talked a little bit earlier, you're going to see again the M47 tank, etc. That's a rush tank in the early 1950s. This Centurion tank is really a World War II tank that we're designing. And what's so good about it is it's because it's a tank we can develop. Mark 1, Mark 2, is it that, let's try to get in, try to get Mark 3. No, it's because you've got a good design that you can build on. And that's with the Centurion. It goes through 30 parts as a gun tank. In other words, the tank that's going to do the business, let alone all the other ones, such as bricklayers, engineer bearings, etc. Then we put a constant tank gun on it. The weighted shot fire. We are worried when we're in Berlin after World War II, they pick up the wreck of the JS3. We know the Soviets, who we're now falling out with in the Cold War, they are building bigger tanks, and they're going to be building, let's not kid ourselves, we know bigger ones are coming. So in the early 50s, we start a project to try and get an even bigger gun that we might be able to put on a tank we're thinking of building called FV215. It's going to be something like the hull of the Conqueror with a bigger turret on. So what's coming on now is really a test bed. It was never going to go into production like this. In other words, a test bed, you're trying something out. And we think we're going to need a gun as big as a 7.2-inch howitzer or 183 millimeters. That is whopping. And in actual fact, this becomes the biggest direct fire gun ever fitted on a tank. And by direct fire, it's not lobbing things over in a distance, point the gun at the target, off it goes. We think we're going to need them for taking on not the T-54s that we know about, and then later the T-55s, that T-10 tank, and whatever the Russians are coming next in their heavy tank programs. So they test this new gun. It has an auto assist to try out firing. The rounds are so big, how the hell are they going to do it? This is stage 2 we've got here, and they carry on experimenting with this about the mid-1950s. But then we realised this was something that we can do with for the Korean War, they're reactivating, they're taking M26 Pershing tanks off of Gengar's for the start of program, actually since the M47. They start the program. And then most of them are handed over to the American Marines. and this one is in US Marines colour. It's a late one, as I said, M103 with A2 model. That's because it's got a newer engine. It's the same engine that powers, we're going to see a bit later, the M6 tank. But the idea is, we sometimes call them overwatch. It's going to be the tank on the hill, but we're going to pick out the bigger Russian tanks, send them on, whilst the other tanks, 120mm gun. So it makes these bigger tanks redundant. So we put that American 120mm gun, we put it on our Conqueror. Same idea, massive tank to take on the bigger ones. It's only in service 10 years before we drop it, because it makes all those other tanks redundant that way. And that's how sometimes technology can make your older vehicle leap forward again. And we start doing those what we thought was going to be the threat to those Soviet vehicles. So it's up that game. That particular Centurion there come down to us, I think it's late 12 or 13 mark. 13 models of Centurion in service, still in service today in South Africa. They call it, this is designed to meet. And of course that game is going on all the time as new bits of technology come into play with modern vehicles and newer threats. So again, when you look at the British Army a bit later on, we talk about drones, etc. Things that are coming in to frighten us again, how are we going to deal with them? And we certainly dealt with it with the L7 gun. Right, as that heads off, I think that's just about to disappear off, and we're going to move on to the next. Is that correct?
Ladies and gentlemen, big round of applause.
unexpected cloud of smoke, we have the first of the T-tanks. This is T55. T55, as I mentioned, yes, coming in the 1950s, and it's an upgrade of the earlier T54. Super big. That was extremely good in its time. It was quite sophisticated. It was diesel, double overhead cam. It was a very good engine, and essentially they've kept upgrading it to power different vehicles. Most Soviet, and certainly these days Russian tank engines, are linear descendants of the Patton M2. And when you look at a T-tank, the thing that tells you what it is the shape. If you look at that, that's unmistakable. You've got a low slung profile and that rock-shaped hull. 100mm gun, quite powerful at the time, but as I said, it's an upgrade. They took the T54 and upgraded its fire control system, gave it a new turret, and for the first time you've got a Soviet tank with what's called a turret basket. Now, for those of you who don't know, as a turret reverses, T55 actually has a turret basket, which makes life a lot easier for the crew. It is very, very practical inside. Crew comfort has never been an obsession of Soviet tank designers, and the T55 is really no exception in that respect. M47. Now, if those of you who are a Tankfest Arsenal, you will have seen long. If they want to upgrade to first of the M48, then 60. But they can't possibly need to gun. The fact that the US Army didn't want to keep hold of these for longer than about 10 years was a major boon and blessing to a lot of European armies. One famous F-47 tank commander a lot of other US tanks is very capable tank. That particular example was serving with the American Army by the US authorities. That camouflage scheme is still tempting to a service over there, as I said, in West Germany. I'm going to say the thing I don't quite on top. Now that's not exactly the low tank to start with. This is an asset in how to put a big gun into the tank. The way they're able to do that is the turret. With a big gun, so bottom half works, top half gives you elevation and pressure. And that way, it is, a lot of tank design is a little bit quirky, a little bit unusual. I think this is really good. That's a 13-ton tank, it's a light tank. a 75mm gun. And they also have a 90mm gun and 105. It was originally thought to be air portable, although having designed the thing, I'm afraid they didn't then build an aeroplane with power for about 20 years. But it remains a remarkable, quirky, strangely attractive to the tank. In the rear of the turret. The tank carries a total of 28 rounds altogether, but once those 12 rounds are complete, you actually have to then stop and reload. But it isn't physically possible to put a human loader in gun on a small tank. That's the light tank. It's the only light tank we're actually seeing today. We're now going to go through to a couple more of the big beasts. The next two tanks we're going to look at are Challenger 1, British, and the T-72, the Soviet T-72.
terms of its construction, the parts, weighs in about 8 tons. Not of that one. light weapon. This is known in the trade as asymmetrical combat, where you, as a developed military power, have access to more fighting technology. The gun on it is a 30mm rifle, 80 rounds per minute, allows you to 2-3 round clips. The CBRTs no longer in service with the British Army, are even still with the Asymmetrical 2. Fighting vehicle. I'm going to get ever so slightly nerdy about this. An armoured personnel carrier is an armoured box which takes infantry safely into and out of battle. Generally they're not armed with anything other than the close proximity to them. An infantry fighting vehicle does the same thing but is armed using a turret. Some of them allow the infantry to fight inside the vehicle. But again, the idea is that you've got to use rifle tractor with turret. The early 90s. The vehicle coming out now is Swiss. Swiss are a neutral nation, or a small neutral nation. They learned a long time ago. There's a small neutral nation parked in the middle of Europe, having a fairly effective defence was a sensible thing to have. They've always been a good arms-producing nation, and this is produced by the Swiss company WWII. And it's almost as if the Swiss have developed a concept rather than a single vehicle. The concept of a lightly armoured, mobile, very versatile armoured vehicle which can fulfil a number of roles. In fact, the Piranha, that's the Piranha 2, the Piranha comes in a 4x4 version, a 6x6 version, an 8x8 version, and even a 10x10 version, which allows it to carry quite heavy weapons as, in many cases, anti-tank or fire support platform. It's sold incredibly well around the world. 21 countries bought either the vehicles or the right to manufacture vehicles. Precisely what the Swiss intended. So, for instance, Piranha 2 was sold on to the Australians. That is armed with a 76mm gun, basically the same gun that was used in British weapons like the Saladin armoured car, like the Scorpion CBRT. It's pretty much the same turret as you get on the Scorpion, not quite the same, but pretty much the same. And you'll notice something when it comes round. You'll notice that the turret on the Cougar is slightly off-centre. It's not particularly off-centre, but it's slightly off-centre. Look very closely at this one. The propellers that it originally had been taken off because as the Cougar was upgraded, they took out of its amphibious propulsion requirement. It's seen service with Canadian forces in a place like Bosnia, where it was used as a fire support system.
Now really, at 8-wheel drive, with about 450 brake horsepower, it shouldn't be getting stuck, but if it is, that's what they use to get it out.
And who are the people that are going to be manning?
It's a twin cab, so there's room for 4 there. Okay, so you have 2 crew in the front, ideally 2 recce mechs, but it can not only recover the vehicles, but recover the crew as well.
And like many of these vehicles, you can add some armour or extra protection if it's going in a threatening environment.
Yeah, absolutely. It can have the additional fire armour put onto it. There is a somewhat apocryphal story of this vehicle accidentally driving through a firefight, not realising it because they didn't notice it. However, if there is a vehicle on the front line that needs help, that's where they're going to be. And that will become much more apparent when we get onto our next vehicle, because you'll see that
A rather good-looking vehicle coming on now. What's this fella?
absolutely. So this is our Piranha, the Challenger Armoured Repair and Recovery Vehicle. I described the SBR. It's designed to lift engines out to allow repair. Looking at the rear there, you see the last will be attached to an A-frame to 5 positions, caution cars.
of a Staff Sergeant Lyndhurst in 2006 in Iraq to challenge maneuver warfare, projecting where we want to be, ignoring any form of natural barrier that may be there.
Maneuver warfare, and it's a really obvious thing, but we have to repeat it. If you're the enemy, you're going to blow up the bridges. Water is always a problem for us. So, a very, very important asset.
As soon as we've started to release this item, as you can see, the best armour is no armour. This is not designed to stand up in a firefight. It's designed to foil their best to strike. Do that, it's got carry on as well. So the idea again, if you're doing maneuver warfare, you've got to appear somewhere the enemies are expecting you and at speed, and these have obviously got that capability. One of the drawbacks of armour, much though I would love it, is often it requires a railway to move it. It's got to be on the rail tracks, which again, high targets. Most recently, deployed off Mali, off Newcombe in Mali, actually peacekeeping mission, and they were pushing out. There's a long-range reconnaissance group going out days on end. More heavily armoured targets with it. Fitted with an array of sonic sensors that will pick up and ID vehicles or munitions from the sound below. Meaning we can double the recce distance, i.e. we can hear them from twice as far away as we used to be able to. Not cannon on the front of the vehicle.
Those of you who went down there, photograph the outside that cable, we really don't want to the latest kits inside. So again, back to it, one of these, something could happen, you need to recover it, we do not want this falling in the bad guy's hands.
Yeah, absolutely. And the whole family of Ajax is key to the principle of the British.
through that target.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the principal role of a main battle tank nowadays is to engage and destroy enemy armour. It's got multiple other things it can do, but that is its main job, and that's what it does the best. Slight effects on the weapon system, however, it is I'm keen to point out that in the last 4 years there's an international tank firing competition that occurs in Latvia, okay, exercise Iron Spear. We've won that with the Challenger 2 twice in the last 4 years. Once with my regiment, the Queen's Royal Hussars, and once with the King's Royal Hussars. It proves that though the accuracy is somewhat diminished, it is still an absolutely world-class weapon system.